Hey everyone, Matt Brunell here with ClickBid, and in today's ClickPod, I want to talk about some more nerd stuff. I have really consumed a lot of time in the AI space, agentic coding specifically, but then also other areas. And today I wanted to focus in on a project that I worked on recently and kind of take it from the perspective of, where I am as a developer, how AI is helping me adapt my skills, and what I think, just from personal opinion, what I was able to accomplish, what I think can be accomplished, and where I think things are going. So I do want to try to stay focused. I have a horrible habit of not staying focused. So let's just try to dig in and see where we go with this thing. So, as you may know, I'm founder and CEO of ClickBid, which basically means that I've been here for 24 years building product and helping nonprofits raise money through charity fundraising. Where we are today is so much further than what I could have taken. As a developer, I've probably been designing websites, writing code for 30 years, but certainly in the last five, probably closer to 10, I haven't really stayed up on the chops of building software and using some of the latest stuff. I mean, we build our platform in PHP with MySQL as a backend, technologies like Laravel, the frameworks that allow PHP to operate more like a mature development platform or coding language. I haven't really stayed up with API development and different hosting technologies with Node. I'm pretty old school. I'm an Apache guy. But, now that, AI has come out, it's given me a chance to take a lot of my foundation, which, listen, I may not be, up to date on different hosting technologies and programming languages, but I have spun up and developed and created a bajillion web servers on AWS and DigitalOcean and Render and all these different platforms. So there's a lot of foundation that can be built upon. And I think AI, specifically for me, Claude Code can be added on top of that foundation. While I think that a person coming cold off the street trying to use Claude to build a new product is going to be challenged, I think somebody with a foundation of developing code, either as a hobby or in a former life, can really take that tool and build into it. So as the example, let me rewind the clock about 3 years. Well, actually, wind the clock back all the way to college. When I was in college, I was a communication student. I took computer science, but I sucked at it. And my passion was film and video, specifically animation. Pixar was really big at the time. This was in the mid 90s. And 3D animation was exploding. It felt, back then, it kind of feels like AI does now. There's this new technology, all these different platforms and everything that are coming out. And now we have, obviously 3D animation is prevalent. It's the primary source of animation, computer aided. And, AI, my guess is in 10, 15 years will just be, it might not even be called AI anymore. It'll just be called, intelligence, But so I had wanted to, really get into that 3D world. And then maybe, fast forward, maybe 2022, 23, I took a athletic training program, which required me to sit on my bike in my house, my training bike, for 45 minutes every single day for like 75 days. And I'm thinking, this is going to get really boring. What am I going to do? So I wanted to take a course, and I found this course online from somebody that I have an enormous admiration of, is Brunell, and he creates these really incredible 3D immersive experiences that, just really, you can, as you can see here on the screen, it's just the capability that he has created with some of these things is just remarkable. And it's a platform or a technology called Three.js, and he has a 70-hour course, probably more now than when I took it. And, I watched every single minute of it. I did a lot of the tutorials and the training, but obviously this is the kind of skill that you have to use on a regular basis. You have to be dedicated, not just in learning, but also implementing. Now, what that means is I didn't really take it very far or take it anywhere. Some of his students have just gone on to do some incredible, amazing things, and he's not the only one that does this kind of crazy, cool, really experiential type web development. With AI, now I could take the foundation of what I've learned from Bruno and from the skills through tutorials and the other leaders out there, and I can build on it. I can ask Claude to help me. And Claude is obviously an expert in every programming language It doesn't always get it right. It needs guidance. It needs instruction. It's kind of like a junior developer that's memorized every single code base, which is kind of weird. Wouldn't really be a junior at that point. But anyway, let's keep going. I know enough about Three.js to be dangerous and the React 3D fiber specifically that builds on the React platform for this kind of stuff. So I took that and I said, okay, well, you work with foundations, you work with nonprofits. And what we're learning about nonprofits in the last 12 months going into 2026 is that every donation is getting more and more critical. Now, I don't know a nonprofit that would ever admit that donations weren't critical, so that's kind of a weird statement. But we need to maximize every opportunity to engage donors, especially in the shifting landscape. This ClickBid is focused on event fundraising software. So, this is promoting an event that's coming up in April for my son's school. We would love your engagement. We would love your contributions to help make scholarships available or tuition assistance available to students at our Grand Rapids, Michigan facility. Anyway, we're going to do an event. So that's really what ClickBid's bread and butter has been for 23 years. However, baby boomers, Gen X, my generation, we will go to events. We go to the event, we participate, and so on. But now we have upcoming generations, the digital generations of millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. I'm starting to, I think there's a new one right on the cusp right now that's coming out. And that is a very digital generation that doesn't necessarily feel that same kind of need to go to an event to be social. They can be social online. So we're trying to find ways and adapt to that changing landscape. And nonprofits have to do the same thing. They have to adapt and constantly be relevant socially. For Gen Xers that run nonprofits, that can be a little bit of a challenge because we're not as, we use social media for entertainment. Gen Z and millennials use it for living, for communication, for getting news and information and groceries and rides and all that stuff. It's not entertainment as much as it is just a fact of life. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to build something that was purely online, a game. So what I did was I thought, let's take advantage of the Olympics, right? I think as I'm recording this, the opening ceremonies are this Friday. And so I created a game and I completely took advantage of Claude Code to build this. I gave it all of the prompts and I used a lot of the tools, all the tools that I could get access to in Claude Code to build this game. And so I just kind of want to walk through my experience with it and what I learned. So let's just take a look at the game. I actually used, you can see down here, the little giveaway with Gemini. I used Nano Banana. I said, hey man, I want a photo that says winter fundraiser. I want a kid skiing, kind of that Disney feel, and so poof, there it was. Actually one shot at this. I was surprised it created that, but I liked it. It worked great. So then I used, taking advantage of ClickBid's API, I created a separate domain called cbo.games. And then now everything you're seeing from here on out is completely generated with AI, agentic code with my guidance. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But if I play the game and then, we have this little skier, I'm using my arrow keys to push the skier left or right, to dodge the flags. Again, this is very rudimentary, very basic, but still, I think it's a pretty fun and effective game. So donors are being promoted to play this. They go online, they play the game. It's free to play. Play it 100 times if you want. You can give it to your kids and say, hey, my score is not that good. You're a young kid. You can really play this game and really rock out a good score. You hit a flag, you get dinged a life. You got 5 lives. The whole thing is 3D generated. Now I did, in fair, to say that it was completely generated with AI, the models, I did ask a very, very talented designer to put together the models to sketch them out. I'll put the link in the bio if you want to reach out to her. She's amazing. And so she was able to create low poly models that I could then implement. But what I used Claude to do was build the actual framework. And then I had, let's take a look at my projects. It created this public folder and it created some basic models, these GLB, if you're familiar with Three.js and 3D modeling platforms, you can create GLB models. And I was able to have her build better models than what Claude built. I mean, the skier that it created was horrible. And then I was able to take hers and drop it in and it just completely just re-rendered it. It was beautiful. And it was so easy to do. So let's take a look at what Claude created. Now, when I started, I just went into a terminal. I work off of my MacBook Pro. I have a projects folder and I just put projects in it and then I run in YOLO mode. Obviously, I'm going to say the same thing that you see online where you definitely need to run it in a containerized environment. If you're using Docker, that's a great way to do it. I do have actually some web servers running on DigitalOcean that I run Claude in. Obviously, the thing you want to avoid is that Claude will delete something that's critical. Now, my entire computer is backed up to iCloud so that if something were to get deleted, I'll just reformat the computer. I'm willing to take that chance. But as I continue, I do think that's still a little bit risky. I think what I would do is start leveraging more of my Docker service that I run, and I could set up a web server. But anyway, when I started with this, I really just said, hey, I'm using Three.js and React 3 Fiber to build a simple Dodge game with a skier, flags, and it should get progressively harder. And then I did, can you use the brainstorm superpower to help me build this? Now, okay, so looking at this prompt, there's a handful of things that I had to know that were available to me from the start. I could have kept the prompt as, hey, I want to build this cool 3D animated game where you're a skier and you're doing like Subway Surfer and you bounce between 3 lanes and stuff like that and be very non-technical. And so the Claude superpowers are meant for that kind of development. I mean, obviously Claude and OpenAI, the new release of Gwen, and then the GLM 7 or 4.7 or whatever, they're moving into the place of making AI-based programming so simple that somebody with zero programming knowledge can build something. Are we there yet? Not in my experience. Even with my background in programming, I have been lost a million times and have struggled, banged my head against the wall. It is a different kind of development. Unlimited resources at your disposal to build something amazing, to ask questions, but there is very little. It's very easy for an AI to just do something so random to a large code base that you're building over time that unless you know what you're looking at, you won't know that the code just changed directions on you and you are now walking down this path that's going to end up being a dead end. But looking specifically at this prompt, I can see here it says, hey, I'm using Three.js and React 3 Fiber. Now, I obviously had to know those were in existence. I needed to know that those were available. I also know that there are plugins that we can use to float things and mirror things and create environments with the plugins for React 3 Fiber. I also know that it's going to be built in React, so it's probably going to have a node server, that kind of thing. When I hit go, it's going to, kick off the superpower and ask me a bunch of questions. What it's going to do is it's going to try to read off of a Claude directory. What I would normally do is create an empty folder and run this brainstorming skill, and it will start asking me questions, typically half a dozen questions, and then it goes into a planning mode. One of the things that I really like about superpowers is that it creates a full framework of parameters that it's going to use to build the code, so that you're less likely to drift off base. If we look at the project folder, the ski game has components. It's got the different game components. So it broke it down into specifics, a scene with rocks, player, obstacle manager. When you look at the obstacle manager, it's got a lot of documentation in it or comment code in it. In my opinion, it wrote some pretty clean code. Now, am I a React or am I even a TypeScript developer? No, I don't write TypeScript. I'm a JavaScript guy, have been. Do I understand how use effect works? Yeah, get use effect, but I'm not somebody who could have written this code without spending 2.5 hours on Stack Overflow. And so, use frame, this is kind of that clock functionality so that it can keep updated. And 3D animation doesn't exist natively in a browser. And a browser doesn't not natively keep track of time and give that time back to the browser so that it can do things. Web pages are typically static. Once the page renders, that's it. Unless you click a button, nothing's going to happen. So in order to create something that happens over time, you have to simulate time elapsing. And so you have to use tools like UseFrame. So that way, everything inside of here is what is managing the movement of the game. The obstacle manager is a small piece of that. Every single one of these files is going to have a use frame function. Now, okay, I've pretty much exhausted my knowledge of use frame. I barely even know how to, I know that, yeah, there we go, import. So use frame, and I'm using use effect and use ref from the actual React platform. I'm using games, did I know to build all these? Absolutely not. It was something that was built using Claude. Again, every line of this code, and that was by design. I wanted to see how far Claude could go in building this. And frankly, I'm pretty impressed. I was very happy. I've hosted this game on a render account. So what I do is, I get into terminal. Again, I'm not even using a GUI like VS Code because I wanted to let everything that happened in this code be managed by Claude. And I use GitHub to manage all of my progress, such that if I make a mistake, I don't have to rely on Claude's rollback capabilities. I can use GitHub to say, listen, I need you to go back to the last commit that you did and just wipe it out. And it will do that. What I found is that when I try to mix Claude Code and my own updates in the same project, sometimes Claude doesn't even recognize that I did something. For instance, I will change the interval of flag generation. So I go in, I know where it's at, it's in a file. I go into the file, I say, okay, obstacle manager, I know it's up here, so let's say spawn distance, I'm going to change that to 60 because I think it's too hard at 50. Well, I'll go in, VS Code, change that, save it, and then I'll go to Claude and I'll say, I need you to commit and push my changes. And it says, oh, I didn't see any changes. Oh, wait, let me do a deeper look. Then it finds it, then it commits it, so sometimes Claude doesn't see what I've done versus what it's done. The other thing that I really like about Claude is that when you look at a repo in GitHub, the commit messages are exceptional, which at first you're like, yes, so what? Listen, I'm guilty of commit messages that are absolutely meaningless, like did stuff, and then commit it. And I know that there are best practices around it, and a good developer would never do what I just, what I said I did. But what I like is that Claude does follow those best practices, and Claude doesn't care. It doesn't get sick of doing it. It's like, oh gosh, if I have to write one more stupid commit message, it'll just do it. And so what I wanted to simulate here is that I am a product manager asking my developer to do this work, and it would do it. But as the product manager or the senior developer, I know enough that while it's using it, building this code, I'm watching it and saying, hold on, we got off base here. This needs to be different. Now, did I spend a lot of unnecessary time using Claude to tweak these parameters? Yeah, probably. If I were to do this, if this were my full-time job, was, leveraging Claude, and, I would definitely use a VS Code, and I would still have Claude do all of my Git commits and my pushes, because I like the fact that it does the commenting for me, and it's much better than I would do, which brings out a point that I want to call out here is that, one of the discussions that I see is, Claude, like when you look at the benchmarks and, like which model is doing better, and, the best they can do is 80%, like on SWE bench and things like that. Well, okay. But what does a senior developer score? What do they do? And you're really not competing against perfection. You're competing against your senior developers. Now, hang on. I know maybe that could be construed in a different way, but what I mean is Claude, the goal of Anthropic is to build an AI coding agent that is as good, probably in their minds, they would like it to be better than the best software developer. But even the best software developer makes mistakes and has bugs. We spend a lot of time tweaking things in our platform to address issues. So what Claude is trying to do is to build something that, there's bugs, and I spend the amount of time that I spend in Claude updating this pool size, despawn distance, base obstacle gaps, and so on, I probably could have just done in 5 minutes with a little bit of testing manually. And this probably took an hour. But by contrast, building the rest of this set pattern function, the use frame function, the export for the actual TSX file, that all happens in a matter of seconds. So you're really, again, if you are lucky enough to have really good software developers at your disposal to help build product, great, good for you. I probably wouldn't, I definitely wouldn't look to replace them with AI. But if you don't have the luxury and benefit of software developers, and you yourself are not somebody who could compete with a senior level software developer, then I think you are in a really good sweet spot with AI and Claude tools. Or, I don't use the other agentic coding tools. I'm definitely a hardcore Claudist. So, but I think, we are a unique niche that can benefit from it. So, in building this, again, there's an awful lot of iteration. If I jump over to let me just switch. All right, so if I jump over to my, ski game, you can look at my code base here. And obviously I'm using Matt and Claude, blah, blah, blah. Now, if I want to look at all of my commits, I have 120 commits on this project that I've probably spent, I don't know, 3 weeks, maybe, working on off and on. What I love about Claude is that it has great consistency. You can see here, this is a feature, it's a app, restructure app for multi-game support with GameCube. This was a big update for me as I changed the way the thing worked. And so we had 26 changed files, but it talks about remove session table and using the ClickBid API and so on. It gives me a lot of detail, and I really appreciate that. So if I were to do a pull request with a developer who knew what they were looking at, then they would be able to look at this and get caught up relatively quickly without me having to have a side meeting to say, okay, here's what we did and this is that. Or they'd have to go through the code and try to decipher what I did. And like, after a while, they'd probably figure it out, but why couldn't they just read a really good commit message that was built by Claude that I didn't have to build? Again, I'm a lazy developer. But you can see there's an awful lot of these commits. Now, what I also do just for my own development is I create an account on Render and I tie it to this repo such that every time there's an update to the main branch, then it will redeploy in the Render account. So that's great for me because then I can go out and test it. I also use locally. I have a ski game and it's a Postgres database. I do develop locally and then test locally and then push to production or to main. Some things that need to be tested when I want to take a look at how it's going to operate on my production server versus my dev server. My dev environment, I can then push it to Render so, simply and easily. And yes, my senior devs at ClickBid are amazing at this. They've created an entire workflow system inside of AWS using all the AWS tools that would make this process that I've built look like a 5th grade school project. But it's, for me, as a single developer working on a small project just to experiment and to explore capabilities of fundraising, I get to actually do this because the difference between me doing this and not doing it is Claude. And I think that's just a major takeaway for me is that even after 70 hours of watching Brunell talk about Three.js, and listen, I don't get paid to push this, but I would, if you want to look at a world-class educational instruction, his stuff is amazing. It's just really great. A masterclass in how to train people something. So it is not his fault that I have no idea how to really sit down and build something in Three.js. He did his best and I still couldn't quite get my head around it. And then 3 years later, I'm not going to remember it. So here I am. But Claude gives me the chance to get over that hurdle. And then all that knowledge that I did learn gives me the chance to stay on top of it and be able to inform Claude on specific things that I think could be considered for future development. So at the end of the day, I have a game that I can play whenever I want. And it's, very functional, highly available, data driven. It's got all the hallmarks of being able to be a production ready system. So I'm just really excited about how it gives me the chance as a software developer who has lost his edge. Not that I love bragging about that, but I can stay in the game in building a platform that can be useful for nonprofits and cost effective and just open the door for me to be able to do it. All right. Well, hopefully that's helpful. And as usual, I'm always available if you have any questions. But yeah, thanks a lot and have a good afternoon.